The ballroom went silent the moment the ice hit her face. Imani Brooks stood frozen in the middle of the marble dance floor of the Whitmore Grand Hotel in Manhattan, her cream-colored silk gown drenched, her carefully pinned curls collapsing against her forehead, her mascara running in dark rivers down her cheeks. 500 of New York's most powerful guests stared at her. Some held their champagne glasses halfway to their lips. Others lowered their phones, having just stopped recording the live charity auction. A photographer's flash went off, then another, then another. Behind her, Tobias Pemberton stood with the empty silver ice bucket still in his hands. He was laughing, actually laughing, with that easy white-toothed smile he had used to win her over 6 years ago in a coffee shop on the Upper West Side. The same smile he wore when he met her father at their small Detroit church. The same smile that had whispered marriage vows to her on a sunny day in May. "That's what happens when you embarrass me, Imani," Tobias said loud enough for the front 3 tables to hear. "Maybe next time you'll learn to keep your mouth shut at adult tables." A few people gasped, but no one moved. And then, from the table closest to the stage, came the sound that would haunt Imani for the rest of her life. The sharp, slow, deliberate clap of 2 gloved hands. Eleanor Pemberton, her mother-in-law, draped in emerald and diamonds, sat with her chin lifted high. She clapped once, twice, 3 times. Her mouth curled into something that was not quite a smile. Finally, Eleanor said, her voice carrying through the hush, "Someone put that girl in her place." The 8-year-old girl in the pale yellow dress sitting next to Eleanor began to cry. Soraya, Imani's daughter. Their daughter. Soraya was reaching for her mother, but Eleanor's bony hand pressed her shoulder back into the chair. Imani could not move, could not breathe. Her chest was so tight she thought her ribs might crack from the inside. The ice water had soaked through to her skin and she was shaking, but she did not know if it was from the cold or from the way her whole life had just split open in front of strangers. She had spent 4 years trying to be the kind of wife Eleanor approved of. 4 years of swallowing words. 4 years of smiling when she should have screamed. And she had come to this gala tonight because she had finally found her courage. She had come to tell Tobias that she had submitted her mathematical research paper to a private quantum computing firm, and they had not only accepted it, but offered her a senior consulting position. She had whispered the news to him at the table, her face glowing, hoping he would be proud of her for the first time in their marriage. Instead, he had stood up, walked to the silver ice bucket on their table, lifted it, and poured it over her head. "You think you're better than me now? You think a pity job from some woman-led tech company makes you somebody?" The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. And still, no one moved. The wealthy guests in their tuxedos and gowns simply watched, the way people watch an accident on the freeway, fascinated and horrified at the same time. Some looked away. Some pulled out their phones again. Imani's reflection in the polished marble floor showed a woman she did not recognize. A woman whose dignity had been poured out along with the ice water. A woman whose own mother-in-law had clapped at her destruction. She wanted to die. Right there. She wanted the marble to swallow her whole. But then, from the stage where the master of ceremonies had been calling out auction items just minutes earlier, a voice cut through the silence. A woman's voice. Clear. Calm. Steady as iron. "Stop the program." 500 heads turned toward the stage. The CEO, who had been the keynote speaker that evening, Naomi Bridgewater, stepped away from the podium. She was a tall, elegant black woman in her mid-40s with graying twists pulled into a low bun, wearing a simple navy gown that somehow looked more expensive than every dress in the room. She had been honored that night for her company, Halcyon Quantum Solutions, donating $50 million to STEM education for girls of color. She was the wealthiest black woman in technology in America. She was also, though almost no one in this ballroom knew it, the woman whose tech firm had just hired Imani Brooks that morning. Naomi Bridgewater walked down the steps of the stage, her heels clicking against the marble, her eyes never leaving Imani. The room held its breath. She passed Eleanor without a glance. She passed Tobias as if he were furniture. She walked all the way across that long ballroom floor until she reached the place where Imani stood shivering and weeping in her ruined dress. And then this woman, this billionaire, this stranger to almost everyone in that room, did something no one expected. She took off her own evening jacket, a pale silver brocade jacket worth more than most people's cars, and she draped it gently over Imani's shaking shoulders. "Walk with me, sweetheart," Naomi said softly, then louder so the whole room could hear. "You are not alone in here. Not anymore." Imani looked up into Naomi's face, and there was something in those eyes she had not seen in so long. Recognition. Tenderness. The kind of look her own mother gave her when she was small and scared and needed to know she was loved. Imani's knees buckled. Naomi caught her around the waist. "Lean on me," Naomi whispered. "Just lean." Across the ballroom, little Soraya pulled away from her grandmother's grip and ran. She ran in her patent leather shoes across that marble floor, past tables of staring strangers, past her father with the empty bucket, until she crashed into her mother's wet legs and held on for dear life. "Mommy," Soraya sobbed. "Mommy, I want to go home." Imani knelt down, ice water still dripping from her hair, and pulled her child into her chest. And for the first time in 4 years of marriage, she made a decision without asking permission. She made it right there on that ballroom floor, in front of every powerful person in New York City. She was going home, but not to Tobias. Naomi Bridgewater placed one steady hand on Imani's back and looked across the room at Tobias Pemberton with eyes that held no fear at all. "Mr. Pemberton," Naomi said in a voice that traveled to every corner of that ballroom, "I would advise you to enjoy your last night of comfort. Because by tomorrow morning, the entire country is going to know exactly who you are." Then she walked Imani and Soraya out of the gala. What no one in that room knew was that Naomi Bridgewater had been waiting 23 years for this exact moment. And what no one knew was why. The black town car pulled away from the Whitmore Grand Hotel just before midnight. Imani sat in the back seat wrapped in Naomi Bridgewater's silver jacket. Soraya was curled up against her chest, finally asleep, her small fingers still gripping the wet silk of her mother's gown like she was afraid Imani might disappear. The streets of Manhattan blurred past the tinted windows. Imani could not stop shaking. Her teeth chattered. Her hands trembled. She was not cold anymore. The car was warm, but her body did not seem to know how to stop the shaking. Naomi sat across from her, her phone in her hand, calmly making calls. "Yes, Marcus. I want the lawyer at her parents' house in Detroit by tomorrow afternoon. Yes, the full team. Family law and corporate. Tobias Pemberton handles the Halcyon retirement account portfolio for his bank, which means we now have grounds. Pull every record."
Pause. Yes.
Also call the Times. The story is breaking whether the Pembertons like it or not. Imani heard the words, but they were far away, like she was underwater. She kept replaying it. The bucket lifting, the cold shock, the laughter, her mother-in-law clapping. The faces of people she had eaten dinner with, smiling at her destruction. Imani. She looked up. Naomi had set down the phone. "You're safe now. I know you don't feel it yet, but you are." "I have nowhere to go," Imani whispered. "Everything I own is in his house. My clothes, my books, my research notes. Books and clothes can be replaced. Tonight we're getting you to your parents in Detroit. My private plane is waiting at Teterboro. Your father is already on his way to pick you up at the Detroit airfield." Imani blinked. "You called my father?" "I called him an hour before the gala began." Imani sat up straighter, dislodging Soraya's sleeping head. "Wait, before the gala? But how did you? I don't understand. I only met you tonight. I have only worked at Halcyon for 1 day. Why did you call my father before any of this happened?" Naomi's face softened. For a moment, the powerful CEO disappeared, and what was left was something more human. Something almost sad. "Imani," she said gently. "I have known your father for 23 years. Imani's mouth opened. She closed it. "I will tell you the whole story when we get to Detroit. Tonight is not the night. Tonight you need to sleep. You need to hold your daughter. You need to be with your mother and father. Tomorrow we begin the work." "What work?" Naomi's eyes hardened, but not at Imani. At something far away. The work of restoring everything that man and his mother stole from you. The plane was small but luxurious. Soraya slept the entire flight. Imani could not. She sat at the window watching the lights of cities pass below her in the darkness. New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio. Then the dark stretch where land met land, and finally the gold and amber sprawl of Detroit. The plane landed at a small private field on the outskirts of the city just before 3 in the morning. Reverend Joseph Brooks was waiting on the tarmac. Imani's father was 60 years old, a tall man with broad shoulders and salt and pepper hair, dressed in his gray church coat over a flannel shirt and jeans. He had been the pastor of New Bethel Hope Church on the east side of Detroit for 30 years. He was the steadiest man Imani had ever known. The moment she saw him standing there in the cold November air, his breath fogging in the runway lights, the dam inside her finally broke. She came down the steps of the plane carrying Soraya, and she walked straight into her father's chest, and she sobbed.
Daddy.
Daddy, he poured ice on me. In front of everyone. And his mother. Daddy, his mother clapped. I know, baby girl. I know. I know. He held her, so tight her bones felt like they were knitting back together. He held Soraya, too. He held them both. He did not say anything wise or churchy. He did not quote scripture. He did not tell her it would be okay. He just held them in the cold dark on a Detroit runway and let her cry until her cries turned into hiccups and her hiccups turned into a tired, hollow silence. Let's get you home, he finally said. Your mama's been cooking since midnight. You know how she is. Naomi stayed on the plane. I'll come to your parents' house tomorrow afternoon, she said to Imani as her father helped her into the truck. Get some rest. Eat your mother's food. Hold your child. Tomorrow, we start fighting. The drive from the airfield to her parents' house took 40 minutes. Imani fell asleep against the cold window, Soraya on her lap. When they pulled into the driveway of the small brick house on Selden Street that she had grown up in, every window was lit up. Inside, the smell hit her first. Fried catfish,
Cornbread.
collard greens, sweet potato pie, her mother's chicken and dumplings. Camille Brooks had cooked enough to feed a small army. Camille came running out of the house in her slippers and her old blue housecoat, her gray-streaked braids flying behind her. She wrapped Imani up in arms that smelled like cocoa butter and pine sol and church perfume. My baby. My sweet baby.
You are home now.
You are home. Pastor Ruth Calloway was there too, the elderly family friend Imani had known her whole life, sitting at the kitchen table with her hands folded in prayer. Pastor Ruth had buried Imani's grandmother and dedicated Soraya as a baby. She rose from the table and hugged Imani without a word, just rocked her back and forth like she was a small child again. They put Soraya to bed in Imani's old room. They sat Imani down at the kitchen table with a plate piled with food she did not think she could eat. But she did eat. She ate her mother's catfish and the tears ran down her face, and she laughed once at something her father said, and then she cried again. Her family ate with her. They did not press her with questions. They just stayed. Around 5 in the morning, when the sky outside the kitchen window was beginning to turn the color of weak tea, Imani finally asked the question she had been holding since the runway.
Daddy.
How do you know Naomi Bridgewater? Joseph Brooks set down his coffee cup. He looked at his wife. Camille nodded. Baby girl, her father said. There's a story I should have told you a long time ago. But I promised somebody I wouldn't until the right time came. And I think the right time has come. Imani waited. 23 years ago, Joseph said, before you were even born, a young woman walked into our church on a Sunday night during a thunderstorm. She was 19 years old. She had run away from home in Mississippi. She had $3 in her pocket. She had nowhere to sleep. Your mother and I took her in. We let her live in our basement for 2 years while she put herself through community college. Imani stared at her father. Her name was Naomi. Imani sat very still at her mother's kitchen table. The sun was rising slowly outside the window, sending pale yellow light across the worn linoleum floor. Her mother had put on a fresh pot of coffee. Pastor Ruth had her arthritic hands wrapped around a mug. Joseph Brooks was leaning forward in his chair, his elbows on the table, his eyes far away in a memory. Naomi Bridgewater came to Detroit in 1998, he began. She was 19 years old. She'd been raised by an uncle in Jackson, Mississippi, after her mama died of cancer when she was 12. The uncle was not a kind man. By the time Naomi was 18, she'd had enough. She got on a Greyhound bus headed north with $3 and a backpack of clothes. The bus broke down outside Detroit. She walked for hours in the rain looking for shelter. She saw the lights of our church on Sunday night service and walked in soaking wet. Imani held her coffee cup with both hands. "I was preaching that night," Joseph said. "I saw her come in. I saw her sit down in the back pew. I saw her crying. After service, your mother went to her. We sat with her until midnight. She didn't have anybody, anywhere. So we brought her home. Your mother fixed up the basement. We gave her a place to sleep, a key to the front door, a seat at our table." Camille smiled gently. "She was so smart, baby. She would sit at this very table and do math problems for fun. She had a notebook full of equations. I never understood any of it, but she would explain it to me like I was the Queen of England, with so much patience. She said she had wanted to be an engineer since she was a little girl, but her uncle told her women didn't do that kind of work. We helped her enroll at Wayne County Community College," Joseph said. "She worked 2 jobs while she went. She saved every dollar. After 2 years, she transferred to the University of Michigan on a scholarship she earned all by herself. She graduated top of her class, then MIT for her doctorate. Then she started her own company in 2007 with money she borrowed from a credit union and slept on couch determination. She made her first million by 2012, Pastor Ruth added quietly. She made her first 100 million by 2020. Imani's hands were trembling. "She lived in your basement?" "For 2 years, Camille said. She used to braid your hair when you were little, before she moved to Boston for school. You don't remember. You were only 4 when she left. But she has never forgotten this family. She has been sending us money every Christmas for 20 years. She paid off the mortgage on this house in 2015 as a surprise."
Mama.
"Why didn't you ever tell me?" Camille reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "Because Naomi made us promise. She said until she had achieved everything she set out to achieve, she didn't want to be known as the girl we rescued. She wanted to be known as the woman who built something. She said one day, when the time was right, she would come back and find a way to give it forward." Joseph cleared his throat. 3 weeks ago, Naomi called me. She said she had been watching a young woman submit her quantum computing research to journals under a husband's last name. And every time, her papers were published, but her husband took the credit. She had pulled the records. She had pieced it together. The brilliant work that was supposedly being done by Tobias Pemberton, vice president at his fancy bank, was actually being done by his wife. Imani went still. "You knew?" "I knew this morning, when she called me," Joseph said. "I was about to call you when she told me to wait. She said something was about to happen tonight at the gala. She said she had offered you a position 3 days ago and that you had accepted. She said she had a feeling Tobias was going to react badly when you told him. She wanted me ready to come pick you up." "She was protecting you, baby," Camille said. "She has been watching out for you for years, and you didn't even know it." Imani put her face in her hands and wept. But these were different tears. Not the tears of humiliation. These were the tears that come when you suddenly understand that you have been loved across years and miles by someone you did not know was loving you. These were tears of gratitude. The doorbell rang. It was 9 in the morning. Imani jumped. Her father stood up. "That'll be her now." Naomi Bridgewater walked into the small Detroit kitchen of the Brooks family home wearing a simple cream sweater and dark jeans, no makeup, her gray twists pulled back. She looked nothing like the powerful CEO from the night before. She looked like family. She walked over to Camille first, who stood up and hugged her like a daughter come home from war. "Mama Camille," Naomi whispered. "My girl," Camille whispered back. Then Naomi turned to Imani. "I know this is a lot," she said. "I'm sorry I have not been in your life the way I should have been. I sent letters when you were small. I sent gifts. I came to your high school graduation. You probably don't remember. I sat in the back, so as not to make a scene. I have watched you become the woman you are. And when I started Halcyon, I always knew that one day I would find a way to bring you in. I just didn't know the cost. Soraya came padding into the kitchen in her pajamas, her hair tied up in the satin bonnet her grandmother had put on her last night.
She stopped when she saw Naomi.
Her eyes got big. "You're the lady who saved my mommy," Soraya said. Naomi knelt down. "Hi, sweetheart. My mommy said you have a whole company of girls who do math." "I do. Would you like to come visit one day?" Soraya nodded, then ran around the table and hugged Naomi's legs. Naomi closed her eyes for a long second. "Now," Naomi said, standing up, "let's talk about what we're going to do to that boy and his mother. Because by tonight, my legal team is going to have a federal case against Tobias Pemberton for financial fraud. He used your unpublished research to make trades for his bank's clients without disclosing the source. That's securities fraud. That's a crime, Imani. He will likely face prison time. And once that comes out, the Pemberton family's social standing in New York will collapse like a house of cards." Imani stared at her. "Federal fraud? He stole your math, Imani. And he made millions on it. The SEC has been quietly investigating for 2 years. I made sure they had what they needed 3 weeks ago when I started looking into him. Oh my God. There is one more thing." Naomi paused. "Tobias has been having an affair with his mother's goddaughter for 2 years. There are photographs. There are hotel records. The press will have all of it by tonight." Camille put her hand to her mouth. "And Eleanor knew about it," Naomi added. "She set them up." The room went silent. Pastor Ruth, who had been quiet this whole time, finally spoke. Her old voice was soft but firm. "The Lord said vengeance is mine. And sometimes the Lord uses his own hands. And sometimes he uses ours." While Imani was sleeping in her childhood bed in Detroit that morning, Eleanor Pemberton was standing in her sunlit kitchen on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, calmly drinking her coffee. She was a woman who had spent her life making sure her family looked perfect. Her own grandfather had been a railroad porter. Her father had owned 3 dry cleaners in Harlem. Her husband, Philip Pemberton, had built his commercial real estate firm from one office building in Brooklyn into a $500 million company. Eleanor Pemberton had married into wealth and had spent 40 years climbing the social ladder of Black high society in New York. She had presided over charity boards. She had hosted senators. She had dressed her son Tobias in tiny tuxedos for cotillions when he was 8 years old. Eleanor believed, deeply and without apology, that breeding mattered more than feeling. When Tobias had brought home a quiet, sweet-faced girl from a Detroit pastor's family, Eleanor had been horrified. The girl was kind. She was educated. She had a math degree from the University of Michigan. But her people were nobody. A small church, a working-class neighborhood, a grandmother who had been a hotel maid. Eleanor had almost begged Tobias not to marry her. But Tobias had wanted Imani. Because Tobias was clever enough to recognize a brilliant mind when he saw one. And he believed, the way men like him often believe, that a brilliant woman could be trained to serve him quietly. For 4 years, his belief had seemed to be correct. Until last night. Eleanor sipped her coffee and read the morning paper. The gala had been a success, raising over $12 million for the Children's Hospital. The paper mentioned briefly that there had been an incident involving a guest, but the photos in the social pages were the usual ones. Smiling couples. Auction vacations. The mayor with a checkbook. Eleanor was satisfied. She had handled the whole thing perfectly. She had told the gala director that her daughter-in-law had had a small breakdown. She had sent Tobias home with strict instructions to call a divorce lawyer first thing Monday morning. She had told her goddaughter Patrice, who was, conveniently, the woman Tobias had been sleeping with, to come over for brunch. The doorbell rang. Eleanor smiled. That would be Patrice. Eleanor walked to her front door and opened it with her usual practiced grace. It was not Patrice. It was 3 men in dark suits with FBI badges, accompanied by 2 officers from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Behind them stood a small woman with a tape recorder and a press pass that said New York Times. "Mrs. Pemberton," the lead agent said, "we have a warrant to search this premises in connection with a federal investigation of Tobias Pemberton for securities fraud, wire fraud, and insider trading. Your husband and son are also being served with subpoenas at this hour. May we come in?" Eleanor's coffee cup fell from her hand. It shattered on the marble tile of her foyer, spraying hot coffee across her shoes. Across town, at the offices of Pemberton Knox Investments, Tobias Pemberton was being escorted out of the building in handcuffs by federal agents while reporters shouted questions at him. His arrest was being broadcast on 3 major news channels. The secretary of his secretary was crying at her desk. In the lobby of the Whitmore Grand Hotel, where the gala had been held 12 hours earlier, the morning television crew was showing the footage that several guests had recorded the night before. The footage was now everywhere. The ice bucket, the laughing husband, the clapping mother-in-law, the CEO walking down the stage, the little girl crying. By noon, the hashtag Stand with Imani would be trending nationally. In a downtown precinct, Philip Pemberton, Tobias's father, was answering questions calmly to investigators. He was 62 years old. Philip had spent his entire life building his company on the principle that he did not steal, did not lie, and did not cheat. He had not known what his son was doing. But as the agents laid out the evidence, Philip Pemberton's face grew darker and darker. He had suspected for some time that something was wrong with the way his son's investment numbers were rising. He had assumed it was luck or talent.
He had not assumed it was theft.
When the agent asked him if he was willing to cooperate fully with the investigation, Philip Pemberton said yes, without a moment of hesitation. He also said, "And I would like to know how my daughter-in-law is." The agent looked surprised. "We can put you in contact with her family if you wish." "Please do. I owe her an apology that should have come a long time ago." By the end of the day, Eleanor Pemberton was sitting alone in her sunlit kitchen with no coffee, no Patrice, who had been arrested for her involvement in the trades after being caught on multiple wiretaps, and a husband who would not return her calls. Her bank accounts were frozen pending the investigation. Her son was in federal custody. Her social calendar, she would soon discover, was about to be canceled. She had not yet realized that the door of her gilded life had just slammed shut behind her. In Detroit, Imani sat on her parents' front porch wrapped in a quilt her grandmother had sewn 40 years ago. The weak November sun was warming her face. Her phone was silent. She had turned it off the night before. Soraya was inside helping Camille bake cornbread for dinner. Naomi was in the dining room on a conference call with 3 lawyers. Pastor Ruth came out and sat next to Imani in the rocking chair. The old woman did not say anything for a long time. They just rocked together. "Pastor Ruth," Imani finally said, "I feel like I should be celebrating, but I just feel sad."
"Course you feel sad, baby.
You loved that man once. You had a child with him. You believed in him. And now you have to accept that he was never who you thought he was. That kind of grief is real. Don't you let nobody tell you it ain't real." "Will it stop?" "Yes." "When?" Pastor Ruth smiled.
"Slowly, baby.
Slowly. The way the sun comes up. You don't see it move. But one day you wake up and the whole sky is gold." Imani nodded. She closed her eyes. For the first time in 4 years, she felt something she had forgotten she could feel. She felt safe. 3 days passed in the small house on Selden Street. Imani slept more than she had slept in years. She woke up to the smell of bacon and biscuits. She read the Bible in the mornings with her father. She helped her mother braid Soraya's hair, the way her own mother had braided hers when she was a little girl. They watched old VHS movies. They ate too much. They prayed. They cried sometimes. They laughed sometimes. Slowly, Imani's hands stopped trembling. Her shoulders dropped from where they had been pinned up around her ears for 4 years. She started to remember what her own laugh sounded like. Naomi stayed in the city, at a hotel downtown, but she came over every afternoon. She brought Imani 2 suitcases of new clothes. She brought Soraya a backpack full of math toys and books, and a doll with brown skin and curly hair like hers. She brought Camille and Joseph a stack of paperwork explaining how the Halcyon employee benefits package would cover Imani and Soraya completely. But the questions had to come eventually. And it was Soraya who started asking them first. On the 4th morning, Imani was sitting on the back porch braiding Soraya's hair. The wind was cold, but the sky was clear and blue. Soraya was eating a piece of bacon and humming. "Mommy?" "Yes, baby." Is Daddy in jail? Imani's hands paused on the braid. She had been waiting for this question. She had practiced what she would say in her head 100 times. But now that it had come, all her words flew away. Yes, sweetheart. Daddy did some things that were against the law. So the police came and got him, and now he has to stay in a place where they keep people who broke the law until a judge decides what happens. Did Daddy break the law because he poured ice on you?
No, baby.
That was a bad thing he did, but it's not against the law. He broke a different law. A money law. Soraya thought about this for a long time. Then she said, "Why did Daddy pour ice on you, Mommy?" Imani's chest got tight. She breathed in slowly and asked God for the right words. Because Daddy was not happy that Mommy had a good thing happen. Some grown-ups, when they are not happy with themselves, get angry when the people around them have good things. Instead of being happy for them, they try to make them small. That is not nice.
No, baby.
It is not nice. Did Daddy ever do that to me? The question hit Imani like a punch to the stomach. She closed her eyes. She thought about all the times Tobias had snapped at Soraya for spilling juice. All the times he had told her she was being dramatic when she cried. All the times he had said she was getting fat after she ate dessert. Soraya was 8 years old. 8 years old. And she had already been learning what cold love felt like. Sometimes, Imani said honestly, sometimes Daddy did that to you too. And Mommy is so sorry I did not protect you better. But Mommy is going to protect you now. And Mommy is going to make sure you know, every single day, that you are wonderful and brilliant and loved exactly the way you are. Soraya turned around in her mother's lap. Her brown eyes were full of tears. But she was smiling. A real smile. The kind of smile Imani had not seen on her daughter's face in maybe a year. Mommy? Yes, baby. Are we ever going to live with Daddy again? No, sweetheart. We are not. Are we going to live here with Grandma and Grandpa? For a little while. Then Mommy is going to find us a new home. A really nice home. With a yard. And maybe a swing. Would you like that? Can it be in Detroit? Imani was surprised. You want to live in Detroit? I like it here. Grandma makes me cornbread. Grandpa lets me wear his big slippers. It smells nice. New York smelled like trash, Mommy. Imani burst out laughing.
Real laughing.
The kind that comes from the deep place. She held her daughter and rocked her in the cold November sun and laughed until she cried. Later that day, Philip Pemberton called. Imani had not spoken to anyone from the Pemberton family since the night of the gala. She had not wanted to. She had blocked Tobias's number. She had blocked Eleanor. She had blocked Tobias's sisters. But she had not blocked Philip. Because Philip had never been cruel to her. He had been distant, polite, but kind in his quiet way. He had brought Soraya a dollhouse for her 6th birthday that he had built by hand, and Eleanor had hated it because it was not from a fancy store. Imani picked up the phone.
Imani.
This is Philip. Hello, Philip. I won't take much of your time. I just wanted to say 2 things. First, I am so deeply sorry for what my son did to you. There is no excuse for it. There is no defense. He has shamed me and shamed our family. I have already made arrangements to fully cooperate with the federal investigation. He will face the consequences of his actions, and I will not interfere. Imani closed her eyes. Thank you for saying that. The second thing, I have been quietly setting aside a trust fund for Soraya for the last 6 years. It was always meant for her. It is in her name only. It is held by an independent firm. Eleanor does not know about it. Tobias does not know about it. The investigation cannot touch it. It is $1.2 million. It will be there for Soraya's college and whatever else she needs. The papers are in the mail to your father's house. I just wanted you to know. Imani had to sit down on the kitchen floor. She slid down with the phone pressed to her ear.
Philip.
Yes. Why are you doing this? Because Soraya is my granddaughter. And because someone in our family should have been kinder to you a long time ago. I'm sorry I wasn't braver. Imani cried softly into the phone for a long minute. Philip waited. Thank you, she finally said. I would also like to see Soraya someday if she ever wants to see me. No pressure. No demands. Whenever she is ready, if ever, I will be here. I promise nothing about her grandmother. Nothing about her father. I am separating myself from both of them. I have already filed for divorce, and I have already disowned Tobias publicly. The press will know by tomorrow. I want you to be the first to hear it from me. Philip, you don't have to do that for me. I'm not doing it for you, Imani. I am doing it because I have spent 40 years married to a woman whose cruelty I excused. I cannot do it anymore. I should have stopped her when she said the first unkind thing about you. I should have stopped my son when he said the first unkind thing to you. I am old, and I am tired of being a coward. I am stepping into something better with the years I have left. After they hung up, Imani sat on the kitchen floor and cried until her father came in and helped her up. She told him everything Philip had said. Joseph nodded slowly. I knew there was something good in that man. The spirit told me, so the only time I met him. That night, Imani held Soraya extra tight as she fell asleep. And for the first time, she dared to imagine what their new life might look like. A house with a yard.
A swing.
A whole new beginning. End of Chapter 5. Plot threads progressed. Soraya's healing begins. Philip's redemption confirmed. Future hope established. Soraya's trust fund secured. 2 weeks after the gala, Imani started her job at Halcyon Quantum Solutions. She worked remotely from Detroit for the first month. Naomi had set up a home office for her in the back room of the Brooks house. New computers. 3 monitors. A high-speed connection. A whiteboard that took up an entire wall. Naomi's idea. Imani had laughed when she saw it. She had not had a whiteboard in her life since college. Tobias had thought whiteboards were tacky for their apartment. Imani filled the whiteboard with equations on her first day. She stood there in her sweatpants and her father's old church sweatshirt, with her natural hair pulled up in a puff, and she wrote and wrote and wrote. By noon she had filled every inch of the board. By 2 in the afternoon she had erased it and filled it again. Camille came in with a sandwich and stopped in the doorway. Baby, what is all this? It's the algorithm I have been thinking about for 3 years. I never had time to write it all out before. There was always something. Tobias needed his shirts. Eleanor was coming over. Soraya needed to be picked up from school. There was always a reason I could not sit down and finish it. But I am finishing it now, Mama. I am finishing it. Camille set down the sandwich. She watched her daughter for a moment. Then she did something she had not done since Imani was a little girl. She walked over and put her hand on her daughter's hair and prayed. Lord, you took every closed door and turned it into an open one. You turned the stone the builder rejected into the head of the corner. You bless this work. You bless these hands. You bless this mind you gave my child. Use it for your glory. In Jesus' name. Amen, Mama. Now, eat your sandwich before your mind floats away. Imani worked harder in those first 3 weeks than she had ever worked in her life. Not because anyone was making her. Because no one was stopping her. For the first time, the things she thought were important were the things that mattered. Her ideas were not being dismissed at the dinner table. Her notebooks were not being moved off the kitchen counter. Her brain was not being told to make itself smaller, so a man's brain could feel bigger. It was like she had been carrying a heavy backpack for 4 years, and someone had finally taken it off her shoulders. She lost weight she had been holding for years. Not because she was trying to, because the stress had melted off her body. She started running in the mornings slowly around the block, then around 2 blocks, then around the whole neighborhood. Her father came with her sometimes, walking briskly behind her, breathing hard, telling her stories about when she was a baby. She started reading novels again. She had not read a novel in 2 years. She read 3 in those first 3 weeks. Soraya enrolled in a small Christian school 3 blocks from a house. She made friends within a week. She started bringing home crayon drawings of houses with swings in the yard. She started calling Camille Grandma instead of the formal grandmother she had been trained to use for Eleanor. She started laughing again, that high giggly laugh that bubbled up like water from a fountain. The federal case against Tobias was moving fast. The evidence was overwhelming. Naomi's lawyers, who were quietly working with the SEC, kept Imani updated. Tobias had stolen Imani's research papers from her laptop dating back 3 years. He had used her algorithms to make trading decisions for his bank's biggest clients. He had pocketed bonuses based on returns he could not have generated himself. The amount he had stolen, when fully calculated, came to $23 million in fraudulent bonuses and commissions, on top of $7 million in client losses he had hidden. Tobias was facing 15 to 20 years in federal prison. His mother Eleanor was being investigated for witness tampering and obstruction. She had tried, in the days right after the gala, to get several of the gala witnesses to change their stories. The FBI had her on tape. She would likely face her own charges within the month. Patrice, the goddaughter who had been Tobias's mistress, had agreed to a plea deal in exchange for testifying against him. She would face only probation. The Pembroke Knox Investments firm, which Philip had built from one office in Brooklyn, was being sold to a larger firm. Philip had personally absorbed the loss of his son's reputation. He had gone on the morning shows to apologize publicly to Imani and to his clients. He had donated $10 million of his own money to women's shelters in New York and Detroit in Imani's honor. Imani had cried watching him on television, this old man with his white hair and his tired eyes, telling the country he was sorry for raising a son who hurt women. Then, for weeks after she started, Naomi flew to Detroit to bring Imani to the office in Boston for the first time. "I want to introduce you to your team," Naomi said over the phone. "I want them to meet you. And I have something to give you." Imani flew to Boston on a Tuesday in early December. Naomi met her at the airport. They drove to the Halcyon Quantum Solutions headquarters, a beautiful glass building in the Seaport district. Imani had been there once for her interview months earlier, when she had still been Mrs. Pemberton, when she had still been hoping Tobias might be proud of her. Now she was walking in as Imani Brooks. Her old name. Her real name. Naomi led her to a large open workspace, where about 30 engineers were waiting. They were almost all women. Almost all women of color. Black women. Latina women. Asian women. Indian women. They stood up when Imani walked in. And they applauded. Imani had not been clapped for, in a kind way, in a long time. She stood there with her hand over her mouth and tried not to cry. "Team," Naomi said. "I would like to introduce you to Dr. Imani Brooks, our new Senior Director of Quantum Algorithm Development." "Doctor?" Imani whispered. "Halcyon has provided a fellowship that will allow you to complete your PhD at MIT while you work. You can do it part-time. We have already arranged for the program. They have already accepted you based on your existing research. You will have your doctorate in 3 years." Imani did not even try to hold the tears back. The youngest engineer in the room, a tiny Indian woman with thick glasses, ran up and hugged Imani tight. "I have been reading your papers since college. I cannot believe you are finally here." By the end of that day, Imani had her own office with her name on the door. Dr. Imani Brooks, Senior Director, Quantum Algorithms. She stood in front of that door and stared at it for a long time. Naomi stood next to her in silence. Then Naomi finally spoke. 23 years ago, your parents gave a scared 19-year-old girl a place to sleep. They gave her dignity when she had nothing. They gave her hope when she did not believe in herself. I have spent my whole life trying to figure out how to repay that. I could not just write a check. That was not enough. I needed to find a way to lift up someone they loved the way they lifted me. Imani turned to look at Naomi. Aunt Naomi. It was the first time Imani had called her that. Naomi's face crumpled. She pulled Imani into a hug, and the two women stood in that quiet hallway and cried. "You're going to be brilliant here, baby girl. And I'm going to make sure no one ever again pours ice on your dreams." A month later, on a snowy Saturday morning in January, the doorbell of the Selden Street house rang. Imani was in the kitchen mixing pancake batter. Sarai was sitting at the counter watching cartoons on a small tablet. Joseph was outside shoveling the porch. Camille had run out to the grocery store. Imani wiped her hands on her apron and went to the door, expecting it to be a neighbor or a delivery driver. It was Damaris Okonkwo. Imani had not seen Damaris in 3 years. Damaris had been her best friend in college at the University of Michigan. The two of them had met in their freshman calculus class and had been inseparable. Damaris was Nigerian-American, born in Lagos, raised in Houston, the daughter of 2 doctors. She had become a heart surgeon. She was 30 years old now, brilliant and busy, and she lived in Atlanta. They had drifted apart after Imani married Tobias. Tobias had not liked Damaris. He had said she was too much. He had made it impossible to invite her over. He had refused to fly to her wedding when she had married a kind man named Kalechi 5 years ago. The friendship had quietly faded the way friendships do when one person disappears into a marriage. Damaris was standing on the porch in a gray wool coat, snow in her short curly hair, holding a wrapped present and a tin of cookies. Imani stared. "You did not return any of my calls for 3 years," Damaris said, her voice sharp but her eyes wet. "I have been worried, sick. Then I see your face on the news. I got on a plane the next morning." Damaris. "You stupid, stupid woman. Why didn't you call me?" Imani burst into tears. She pulled Damaris into the house and hugged her so hard the gift fell on the floor. They stood in the foyer of the small Detroit house and held each other while the snow blew sideways outside. "I am sorry," Imani whispered. "I am so sorry. He made me cut everyone off. I was such a fool." "You are not a fool. He was a monster. There is a difference." Soraya peeked her head around the corner. She did not remember Damaris. "Soraya," Damaris said, kneeling down. "I have known your mother since she was 18 years old. I am your Auntie Damaris. I have brought you cookies." Soraya looked at her mother. Imani nodded. Soraya then took the tin of cookies and ran into the kitchen, fully convinced. Damaris stayed all weekend. She and Imani sat up the first night until 3 in the morning, drinking tea, eating cornbread, and talking. Imani told Damaris everything. The slow erosion of her self-respect. The way Tobias had taken her ideas. The way Eleanor had criticized everything about her, from her hair to her cooking to her laugh. The way she had stopped recognizing herself in the mirror. Damaris listened with the steady focus of a surgeon. "You're going to be okay, Imani. I have watched people come back from worse than this in my operating room. The body and the soul are both miraculous. They both want to live. What if I do not know how to be alone? You are not alone. You have your child. You have your parents. You have me. You have Naomi. You have your church. You have people, Imani.
You have always had people.
You just stopped letting yourself need them." Damaris stayed for the rest of the weekend. She braided Imani's hair on Saturday afternoon. She helped Camille cook a Sunday dinner of jollof rice and curried chicken. She taught Soraya how to count in Yoruba. She made Joseph laugh until he had tears in his eyes, telling stories about her own father, who had been a strict Nigerian man who once chased a rooster around his backyard for an hour. When Damaris flew back to Atlanta on Sunday night, she made Imani promise to call her every Sunday. Imani promised. And she kept her promise. 2 weeks after that, in late January, the local Detroit paper ran a small story about a quiet event happening at the New Bethel Hope Church on a Saturday morning. It was a women's empowerment breakfast hosted by a CEO from Boston who had grown up in the church basement decades earlier. Naomi had quietly set it up. She had paid for the food, the tables, the flowers, and the speakers. She had invited every woman in the neighborhood who had walked through some kind of hard season. She wanted them to have a morning of celebration and breakfast. About 150 women showed up. Some of them with children. Some of them in their best church clothes. Some of them in jeans and sweatshirts. Camille and Pastor Ruth had cooked all night. Joseph and a team of men from the church served coffee and orange juice. Imani had been asked to speak. She had not spoken in front of a crowd in 6 years. She stood at the podium of her father's church in a soft brown sweater and dark slacks. Her hair was natural and pulled back with a gold clip. Her hands were shaking. She looked out at the women in the pews. Some of them she knew. Some she did not. Some had eyes that looked like her own eyes had looked 3 months ago. Tired eyes. Eyes that had been disrespected for too long. She took a deep breath. She set down her notes. And she spoke from her heart. "I am 30 years old. I have a degree in mathematics. I have a daughter named Soraya, who is the best part of my life. I am a child of God. I am a daughter of a pastor. I am a friend of a heart surgeon. I am an employee of a company started by a brilliant Black woman. I am a thinker. I am a researcher. I am a writer of equations no one else in the world can see the way I see them."
She paused.
Her voice trembled a little. Then it grew steady. "For 4 years I forgot all of those things. I let a man and his mother convince me that I was nothing without their last name. I let them slowly close the doors on every part of me until I was a tiny version of myself, walking around in a beautiful house, wearing beautiful clothes, with no idea who I was anymore. And I am here today, sisters, to tell you that the woman the world sees in those Gala videos is not the woman I am. The woman in those videos was a sad, frightened wife who had forgotten her own voice. The woman standing in front of you now has her voice back. And she is not putting it down for anyone, not for any man, not for any mother, not for any title, not for any house, not for any check." The room was quiet. A few women were openly weeping. Camille was holding Pastor Ruth's hand. If anyone here is in a place where you have forgotten your own voice, if anyone here is hearing things at home that are slowly turning you into a small version of yourself, if anyone here is being told you are too much or not enough or too dark or too smart or too quiet or too loud or too anything, I want to tell you something today. You are exactly who God made you to be, and you have a voice, and you can find it again, and the people who love you will hear it, and the people who do not love you will not, and that is how you will know who is who. The applause that came was not the polite applause of a charity event. It was the kind of applause that was 150 women standing on their feet in a small Detroit church, shouting and crying and lifting their hands. Imani stood at the podium and let the love wash over her. She would later say that this morning, more than any other moment, was the morning she truly began to come back to herself. Tobias Pemberton's federal trial began on a cold Wednesday morning in March in a Manhattan courthouse. Imani had not planned to go. Her lawyers told her she did not need to be there. She would be called as a witness on day 3. There was no reason to sit through the opening statements and the early testimony from the FBI agents. But Imani had decided 2 nights earlier that she needed to be there. Not for revenge. Not even for closure, exactly. She needed to look at Tobias in the eye, in a place where his charm could not save him, where his money could not buy him out, where his mother could not protect him. She needed to see him stripped of everything he had ever used to hurt her. And she needed to do it standing up. Camille flew to New York with her. Joseph stayed home with Soraya, who had no idea any of this was happening. The 8-year-old was being protected, fiercely, from every news channel and every newspaper and every classmate who might have heard rumors. She thought her father was working in another city, for a long time. They would tell her the full truth one day, when she was older, when she was strong enough to hold it. Naomi was at the courthouse. Damaris had flown up from Atlanta. Philip Pemberton was there too, in a dark suit, sitting on the prosecution's side. Pastor Ruth had sent prayers across the miles. Imani walked into that courtroom in a navy blue suit that Naomi had bought her, her head high, her heels clicking against the marble like Naomi's had clicked the night of the gala. She walked past the row where Tobias's lawyers were arranging their papers. She walked past the gallery where reporters had filled half the seats. She walked past the second row, where she saw Eleanor Pemberton sitting in a black coat with her gray hair pulled tight against her scalp. Eleanor's eyes met Imani's. Imani did not look away. For one long second, the two women looked at each other across the aisle. And Imani saw something she had never seen in Eleanor's face before. She saw fear. The fear of a woman who had spent her whole life believing she would always have the upper hand and who was now, for the first time, on the lower one. Imani did not smile. She did not glare. She simply looked at Eleanor with the calm, even gaze of a woman who knew her own worth. Then she turned her head and took her seat behind the prosecution. Eleanor was no longer her problem. The trial took 3 weeks. The prosecution presented evidence of Tobias's fraud in painstaking detail. They showed the trades. They showed the emails between Tobias and Patrice. They showed the bank records. They showed the unauthorized access to Imani's research files. They showed that he had stolen her work, sold it as his own, and made millions on it. On day 3, Imani took the stand. She wore a deep emerald green dress. She wore her grandmother's pearl earrings. She walked up to the witness box and was sworn in. She did not look at Tobias. Not at first. The prosecutor, a serious woman named Yatunda Desina, walked her gently through the testimony. Imani described her work. She described how she had developed her quantum algorithms over many years. She described the encrypted folders on her laptop where she stored her unfinished papers. She described the night she had come home from her mother's birthday party at the very beginning of their marriage and found Tobias on her laptop reading her unfinished work. She described the conversations after that. How Tobias had asked her to explain her ideas. How he had asked her to help him understand her algorithms. How she had thought he was just curious. How she had thought he was just being a good husband. At what point did you realize he was using your research without your knowledge? The prosecutor asked. 3 years into our marriage. I saw a paper published in a major industry journal under his name. The math in it was almost identical to a paper I had written and stored on my hard drive but never published. What did you do? I asked him about it. What did he say? He told me I was being paranoid. He told me my math was not the same. He told me I was getting hysterical. He told me he was worried about my mental health. Did you believe him? Imani paused. Tears came to her eyes. She wiped them with the back of her hand. I wanted to believe him. I was his wife. I had a baby with him. I was 26 years old, and I did not know what to do. So I made myself believe him. And I never opened that issue again. Until last fall, when my own laptop notifications showed me that he had been logging into my encrypted folders without my permission for years. Mrs. Pemberton. Dr. Brooks. Excuse me, Dr. Brooks. Why did you decide to come forward? Imani took a deep breath. She finally looked at Tobias. He was sitting at the defendant's table in a gray suit that hung loosely on him. He had lost weight in jail. His face was thinner. His eyes had circles under them. He was looking at her with an expression she did not recognize. It was not anger. It was something quieter, almost like grief. She looked into his eyes and she answered the question. Because I have a daughter. She is 8 years old. And one day she is going to grow up and ask me what I did when something terrible happened to me. I want to be able to tell her that I told the truth. I want to be able to tell her that I did not let the people who hurt me get away with hurting other people. I want her to know that her mother stood up. So that one day, if anyone ever tries to make her small, she will remember her mother, and she will not be small. The courtroom was silent. Tobias dropped his head. Imani saw his shoulders shake. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel anything. She just turned back to the prosecutor. No more questions, Your Honor, Yatunda Desina said. The defense lawyer's cross-examination was short. He had nothing real to challenge. The evidence was too overwhelming. He tried to suggest that Imani had given Tobias her research voluntarily, but the prosecution had emails showing the opposite. He tried to suggest that Imani had been part of the fraud, but the prosecution had logs showing she had no access to the bank's accounts. He tried to suggest that Imani was making it all up out of bitterness over the failed marriage. The judge actually rolled her eyes at that one. When Imani stepped down from the witness box and walked back to her seat, she walked past Tobias's table. He looked up at her. His eyes were wet. Imani, he said very quietly, so softly that only she could hear. I am so sorry. She paused. She looked at him for a long moment. I forgive you, Tobias. His face crumbled. But I am not coming back. Not ever. And you will not see Soraya until she is grown and decides for herself. That is the cost of what you did.
She walked away.
3 weeks later, the jury found Tobias Pemberton guilty on all 12 counts of securities fraud, wire fraud, and insider trading. He was sentenced to 17 years in federal prison. Eleanor Pemberton was indicted that summer for witness tampering and obstruction of justice. She pleaded guilty in exchange for a 5-year sentence and the forfeiture of her assets. The Upper East Side apartment was sold. The diamonds were auctioned. Bernice Holloway, the 70-year-old housekeeper who had worked for Eleanor for 30 years and had been quietly fired without severance the day after the gala, received a quiet visit from Naomi Bridgewater that summer, who handed her an envelope containing a check for $100,000 and a job offer at Halcyon as a part-time hospitality coordinator. You stayed kind in a cold house for 30 years, Naomi told her. That kindness is going to be paid back now. Bernice cried. Philip Pemberton went on with his life. He sold his company. He bought a small house in upstate New York. He took up gardening. He sent Soraya a letter every month. Imani read each letter to Soraya without any commentary, just love. The Pemberton dynasty, which Eleanor had spent 40 years building, was finished. But something else was just beginning. In the summer of the next year, 18 months after the gala, Imani bought her first house. It was in the West Village neighborhood of Detroit, a quiet tree-lined street about 10 minutes from her parents' house on Selden. The house was a two-story brick colonial built in 1925, with hardwood floors and big windows and a brick fireplace and a small backyard with an old oak tree that was perfect for hanging a swing. Imani had walked through it with the realtor, a kind older man named Mr. Doyle, and she had known the moment she stepped into the front parlor that this was the one. The house had a feeling of peace in it, like it had been waiting for her. She paid for it in cash, with money she had earned from her own work at Halcyon plus a small bonus from the publication of her first major paper, which had been accepted into the Journal of Applied Quantum Mathematics that spring. She had not used a single dollar of the divorce settlement, which had been a substantial sum. She had put all of that money into a trust for Soraya and into a foundation she was starting in her grandmother's name to help other women going through divorce. Imani's name on the deed was Dr. Imani Brooks. She had legally changed her name back the week after Tobias's sentencing. She moved in on a Saturday in June. Joseph and Camille drove the moving truck. Pastor Ruth brought a casserole and blessed every room. Damaris flew in from Atlanta with her husband Kalechi and their 2-year-old daughter, who Soraya immediately scooped up and treated like a baby sister. Naomi came too, in jeans and a sun hat, carrying a hammer. She helped hang Imani's pictures on the new walls. You know what? Naomi said, looking around the living room when they were done. This looks more like a home than my apartment in Boston. You can come stay anytime, Aunt Naomi. I might just take you up on that, baby girl. Soraya was 9 years old now. She had grown 3 inches since the gala. Her hair had grown longer. She wore it in 2 big curly puffs. She had become a confident, funny, math-loving little girl who could already solve algebra problems that most middle schoolers struggled with. She wanted to be an engineer like Aunt Naomi. She had decided this firmly. She also wanted to be a heart surgeon like Auntie Damaris. She figured she could probably be both. Imani did not argue. That first week in the new house, Joseph came over with his old red toolbox and his wooden ladder. He spent 2 days building Soraya a swing on the oak tree in the backyard. It was wood and rope, the same kind of swing Joseph had built for Imani when she was Soraya's age. The first time Soraya sat on it, she let out a scream of joy that brought every neighbor to their windows. Imani stood at the kitchen window and watched her daughter swing in the late afternoon sun. Camille came up next to her, drying her hands on a dish towel. Look at her, Mama. I see her, baby. I never thought I would see her this happy. That is because you forgot, baby. Children come back to themselves quick. So do mamas. The both of you have come a long way. Imani leaned against her mother's shoulder. She thought about the scared, drenched woman she had been on that ballroom floor in November. She thought about the cold ice water running down her face. She thought about the laughter. She thought about the clapping. She thought about the loneliness of those 4 years when she had not known her own name. And then she looked at her daughter on the swing, and her father waving from the lawn, and Damaris laughing on the patio with her husband, and Naomi pouring iced tea, and Pastor Ruth dozing in a porch chair, and Camille beside her smelling like cocoa butter, and she knew. She had not been alone. She had never been alone. The work of seeing it had just taken time. That night, after everyone had gone home or gone to bed in the guest rooms, Imani sat alone in her new study with a single lamp on and her grandmother's quilt around her shoulders. She opened her laptop. She had been working on a paper for the last 6 months. It was the most important paper of her career. It was about a new kind of quantum encryption that, if it worked, could revolutionize the way medical data was stored and shared, making patient information far more secure than anything that currently existed. The math was extraordinary. The implications were huge. Naomi had told her, just last week, that early reviewers were calling it potentially Nobel-quality work. Imani had not let herself think about that phrase too much. She had a daughter to raise. She had a life to live. The Nobel Prize was not the point. The point was that she was doing the work. The point was that no one was stealing it from her. The point was that her name was on it. Her own name. She typed the final paragraph. She read the paper through one more time. She closed her laptop. She turned off the lamp. She went to bed in her own bedroom, in her own house, in her own city, surrounded by the sound of her own family sleeping. She slept the deepest sleep she had slept in 8 years. 3 years after the gala, Imani Brooks stood at a podium in Stockholm, Sweden. She was not at a charity event this time. She was not in a soaked silk gown. She was not afraid. She was at the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, in a long emerald green dress that had been designed for her by a young black designer in Detroit named Adiz Whitaker, with her grandmother's pearl earrings, with her hair in a high crown of natural curls. She was 32 years old. She was the youngest black woman in the history of mathematics to be honored with a special recognition for her quantum encryption research, which had now been adopted by hospitals in 19 countries to protect patient data. The Swedish Academy was giving her the King Faisal International Prize in Science, along with 2 other researchers from her field. Soraya was in the front row. She was 11 now. She was wearing a soft yellow dress that her grandmother Camille had picked out. Her hair was in 2 long braids tied with yellow ribbons. She was sitting next to Joseph and Camille, both of whom had flown overseas for the first time in their lives. Pastor Ruth had been too frail to travel, but had blessed them all from her couch in Detroit. Damaris and her husband Kalechi were there. Naomi Bridgewater was there. Philip Pemberton was there too, in the second row, wearing a dignified black suit and looking older but well. He had become a close friend of the Brooks family over the past 2 years. He sometimes came to Detroit for Sunday dinner. Soraya had finally decided, on her own, that she wanted to know him. They were just beginning a careful, gentle relationship. Bernice Holloway, the housekeeper Naomi had rescued, was there in the 3rd row, beaming. Imani stood at the podium. She looked out at the auditorium full of scientists and dignitaries from around the world. She looked at the cameras broadcasting the ceremony to 30 countries. She looked at her daughter. She smiled. "My name is Dr. Imani Brooks," she said. "I want to thank the Swedish Academy for this extraordinary honor." The room applauded politely. "I want to begin," Imani continued, "with a story that may surprise you. 3 years and 4 months ago, I stood on another stage. It was not as nice as this one. It was the dance floor of a hotel ballroom in New York City. I was wearing a wet silk gown because my husband had just dumped a bucket of ice on my head in front of 500 people. His mother had clapped. The world had laughed. And I stood there in that ice water at the lowest moment of my life, and I thought I was finished. The room had gone very quiet. I was not finished. Not by a long way. Because in that moment, when I was sure that nothing more could be saved, a woman walked across that ballroom floor and put her jacket around my shoulders. And she said something that I will never forget. She said, "You are not alone in here. Not anymore." Her name was Naomi Bridgewater. She is sitting in this room tonight. 26 years ago, when she was a scared 19-year-old runaway, my parents in Detroit took her in and gave her a place to sleep. They did not know that almost 3 decades later, she would walk through fire to save their daughter. They were just doing what kind people do. They did not plan it. They did not know what would come of it. Imani paused. She looked at her parents. Camille's eyes were wet. "I tell you this story because the work I am being honored for tonight is not really my work alone. It is the work of 1,000 small kindnesses that flowed through my life. It is the work of my mother, who put a sandwich in my hand when my mind was too far gone to feed itself. It is the work of my father, who never made me feel ashamed when I came home broken. It is the work of my friend Damaris, who got on a plane the day she saw my face on the news. It is the work of Pastor Ruth, who taught me how to pray when I could not even cry. It is the work of every woman in my church who wrapped her arms around me when I was nothing but raw skin. It is the work of an old housekeeper named Bernice, whose kindness in a cold house showed me what dignity looks like when no one is watching. It is the work of Philip Pemberton, my former father-in-law, who found his courage at 62 and used the years he had left to do better. Philip blinked back tears. He nodded slowly. And it is the work of my daughter Soraya, who is 11 years old and is going to do things in this world that will make all of us look small. Soraya was beaming. The audience laughed warmly. My research is about encryption. It is about protecting information. It is about making sure that the things people need to keep safe stay safe. I think now, at the end of these 3 years, that I understand my work better than I did when I was doing the math. Because there are things in life worth protecting. The dignity of a woman is worth protecting. The mind of a girl is worth protecting. The dreams of a child are worth protecting. And sometimes, the work of protection looks like a mathematical equation. And sometimes it looks like a Detroit pastor opening his front door to a stranger in the rain. Both are sacred. Both are the same work. She paused. Her hand was on the podium. She looked steady.
Strong.
To any woman watching tonight who is sitting in a beautiful house wondering where her voice went, who has been told she is too much, who has been told she is not enough, who has been told that her ideas belong to someone else, who has been told that her dreams are inconvenient, who has had ice poured on her in any one of the 10,000 ways the world pours ice on women. I want to tell you something. The water dries. The dress is replaceable. The shame is not yours. It belongs to the one who poured it. You are not finished. Not by a long way. And the people who love you are coming. Even now. Even if you cannot see them. They are coming. And so is the version of you who is going to laugh again. She is coming too. The room rose to its feet. The applause was thunderous. It went on for almost 3 minutes. When Imani stepped down from the podium, Soraya ran to her. The little girl in the yellow dress wrapped her arms around her mother's waist. Camille was crying. Joseph held his daughter and his granddaughter together, and the 3 of them stood there like a tree with 3 branches, rooted deeply, leaning into the wind together. Naomi watched from her seat. She had her hand over her mouth. She was thinking about a thunderstorm in Detroit 26 years ago. She was thinking about a soaking wet teenager who had walked into a small church looking for shelter. She was thinking about the mysterious way that one act of kindness had braided through the years and had brought her here, to Stockholm, to watch the daughter of her saviors stand on the highest stage and tell the world that she had not been broken after all. She wiped her eyes. That night, after the ceremony, the family gathered in Imani's hotel suite. They ordered too much food. Soraya jumped on the bed. Joseph fell asleep in an armchair before midnight. Camille and Naomi sat by the window talking in soft voices about nothing and everything. Damaris and Kalechi danced slowly to old Marvin Gaye. Philip Pemberton sat quietly in the corner with a small smile on his face. Imani stood at the window of the hotel and looked out at the snowy lights of the old European city. She thought about the ballroom. She thought about the marble floor. She thought about the cold water on her face. She thought about the laughing husband. She thought about the clapping mother-in-law. She thought about the woman in the silver jacket who had walked across that floor. And she smiled. She had been afraid that the gala was the worst thing that would ever happen to her. It turned out, instead, to have been the best. Because that was the night the ice broke. And underneath all that ice, there had been a river, running clear and steady all along, just waiting to be free. She turned away from the window. Her family was waiting.
She went to them.